Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sayal Her, and I'm very, very honored to have an incredible guest today with us. Ever so briefly, I'm a business, if you will, transformation and change agent. I partner with organizations to help them calibrate their business models and operating models to maximize their impact. I really try to tap into what I call the sacred triad: reality, human nature, and identity, and helping those achieve the greatest aliveness through their awareness to achieve that impact. I want to briefly set the stage and truly respect the time that we have with this incredible human being that is with us today. We're very, very fortunate. We have Kirk Schneider with us. He's a licensed psychologist, a spokesperson for contemporary existential humanistic and existential integrative psychology. The words humanistic and existential, the vastness of this man's wisdom, academics, profession, I honestly can't do any justice to. He has truly a deep understanding of the human condition and human nature, which we are eager, very eager to learn from. By all means, his two books in particular, The Paradoxical Self and likewise The Spirituality of Awe, are tremendous. Uh, I reached out to the gentleman through his article, Life Enhancing Anxiety. And I want to read just a few things, if you will, before I invite the gentleman in. He says, I call for a renewed appreciation for anxiety, an appreciation that would preempt a lot of the mayhem we see in the world. And we definitely need his wisdom given all the mayhem that we are all experiencing in every facets of life. Likewise, he continues, life enhancing anxiety is the dynamic, emancipatory anxiety that bolsters our vitality in living. Truly, truly, very, very deep words. He says, in short, I define life enhancing anxiety as an anxiety that enables us to live with and make the best of the depth and mystery of existence. It is integral to, if not foundational, for a sane and flourishing world. The pioneer, the visionary, and above all, the humanist from which we all have so much to learn from. Kirk, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sai. And I'm not sure how I can respond back with such a wonderful introduction, but I'm very appreciative.
Sir, you have responded in all your contributions already. I would love for you to just share briefly with who is Kirk. Help people really understand who you are, my good friend.
Well, clearly hard to do in just a few minutes, but so much of my life was shaped very early on when I was a small child. And I was blessed with parents who were very psychologically minded and very supportive of uh, my growth and my grappling with very difficult issues. Actually, starting very young, uh, I lost my 7-year-old brother to a series of diseases when I was about just before 3 years old, and this was a shattering, as you can imagine, for me and certainly my parents. And uh, as I say, they were psychologically minded enough to refer me actually to a psychoanalyst when I was very young. This was pretty unusual in the early 60s. Uh, I, I think he helped to save my life at that early stage. I was having a lot of trouble, a lot of deep fears, fears about living, about disease, uh, monsters taking over, many continual fears. In any case, I feel like that was a huge factor in my moving from a place of basic terror and paralysis to beginning to wonder about this incredible world that we live in and this life that we live in, and in dealing with paradox, basically dealing with really rude contradictions, uh, contradictions that rip open the fabric of one's routine living, one's expectations. And I think this is basically the essence of trauma. Trauma rips our world open and it tears asunder the routine and the familiar. And we're in a place of no ground, basically. And that's a lot of how I felt as a small child. At the same time, uh, beginning to open up because of the support I had from my parents and this particular analyst that I had as a very young child. Uh, Beginning to learn to stay present, more present to the very challenging times I was experiencing. And this really kind of set the path for my life toward psychology, toward philosophy. I became more and more interested in that which was unusual, uh, strange, even upsetting in a strange sense. I mean, I began to be very interested in science fiction as a small child. In those days, they had great programs like The Outer Limits
Yeah.
and Twilight Zone, and even One Step Beyond about the paranormal. I was very intrigued by those shows, and I think I felt like they related to me in a lot of ways. Strange states of mind and beings and imaginings. So I was working with all of that, and from a pretty young age, also beginning to put on plays in my room, with myself, little toy characters, and then eventually began to write some as I got into junior high school. Probably unusual. I was interested in Edgar Allan Poe.
That,
I became interested in these edgy, sort of horrific kinds of tales. But to me, they were movements toward the extraordinary and toward possibilities. And I think that's a lot of what my life pivoted around was that that sort of flip side of a coin between the terrifying and the groundless and the sense of being in a kind of black hole of the unknown, and also edging toward a sense of the amazement
mhm.
of those edges and of that sort of no boundary, if you will. And the combination of the two I found very powerful. Again, I was captured by fears for much of my early life, and even pretty much up to graduate school. And that's the point at which I had another very pivotal psychotherapy where I was beginning to really break down in my life. There was a series of events that I think brought me back to those very early childhood uh, um, chasms, those terrors. And I again was blessed with a wonderful depth psychotherapist, existentially oriented uh, psychotherapist, who helped me again to stay more present, as radically uncomfortable, as terrorizing as the feelings of groundlessness, of floundering were. She was like a rock, and I had the sense that she had been there too. That was very powerful, the modeling that I got from her. And she supported me to practice staying with whatever was coming up. And there was a lot of really jarring fantasies and fears that I had. I had panic attacks, etc. But it was so pivotal after those roughly 9 months with this person when I was in graduate school. I really feel like she helped me to find a new life, a life of much more inner freedom, where I wasn't so intimidated by, roaming within, if you will. Uh, and I was able to experience myself more fully, thoughts, feelings, body sensations, imaginings, and other people, uh, able to open up in relationships much more, and appreciate the gift of life in a way that I never had so fully. Partly, in great part, because I was able to appreciate it rather than being so terrified by it and daunted by it. So I became more and more acutely aware of how fear can drive so many of our ways of being. And on the other side of that, developing what I call a sense of awe toward living, um, can help us to open up and get beyond the petty and narrow identifications that we get so stuck in. And understandably, again, I have very deep empathy for being in those narrow places. I was, and I am at times. Um, it's just that through those kinds of journeys that I took, I was able to see that there's so much more than those places, especially those harsh judgments toward ourselves, devaluing places. And so I was able to experience life much more as an adventure. That's part of the beauty of the sense of awe for me. And I mean, more formally, I define awe as the humility and wonder, or the sense of vulnerability, fragility, but at the same time, great capacity to transcend, to venture out, to take risks, to embolden one's being. Uh, and so the humility and wonder, or sense of adventure toward living. To me, this is the epitome of adventure. When you think about walking through the woods and a dark night, of course, it can be horrifying, and you feel like there's wolves all around you, or who knows what could consume you in that situation. But isn't that part of the thrill of it? And I think everyone who's been a kid has some understanding of that, the power of the night to light the imagination and to bring fresh possibilities as well as these apprehensions. Uh, and for me, that's the essence of living is being able to be in touch with those fuller ranges of our experience. And that's why I think awe is such a great and timely notion, sensibility, really, because we can get so stuck in, you know, single ways of thinking, which I call the polarized mind. That's a
Yeah.
whole other
Yeah.
facet of it. The fixation on a single point of view to the utter exclusion of competing points of view. And that for me really comes out of fear to a great extent. That's what fear does.
Mhm.
It jars us into striving for certainty, for absolutism. And it's the bane of our individual lives, I think, as well as our collective lives. And
Yeah.
we don't seem to learn generation after generation very much about how to address it. But anyway, that's some of the work and living that I've been doing, is attempting to address those very primal fears. Yeah.
You are truly the embodiment of the work itself, which is eloquent and comes through in how you express the journey. And we've so much to learn, if you will, from that. Uh, as I reached out to you around the your writing around life enhancing anxiety,
Yes.
would love for you to kind of elaborate a little bit there, and that amongst all your work resonated and continues to resonate for me so deeply. But life enhancing
I
anxiety, my friend.
appreciate that. Yeah, I mean that emerges out of that whole seedbed that I was describing. But basically, what I've come around to more and more is that there is a kind of anxiety, a vital anxiety, if you will, that I feel like we're so uh, so overlooking in our world, especially today. We have so many ways to keep ourselves from being anxious, again in a constructive way. And as a result, I think we become more anxious,
Yeah.
and our world is filled with anxieties, in great part because we have not addressed this very vital anxiety of living. You described it before, but that's my formal definition of life enhancing anxiety is anxiety that supports us to live with and make the best of the depth and mystery of existence. And that's basically what we come into when we're traumatized, when we're jarred into seeing things or people in different ways, um, when we step out of the routine and familiar. We come into the depth and mystery of our living. And we can go basically two ways. We can quickly cover that over with, let's say, some kind of drug, or uh, maybe it's an ideology, it's a form of religion, perhaps. I'm talking about a dogma of some kind,
Yeah.
an instant answer. And our technology also makes it very seductive to find instant answers, as you well know. Um, this is a quick fix, instant result world, and I think that's really it's just devastating us in terms of being able to developing the capacity for life enhancing anxiety, because it can so readily distract us, and at least give us the illusion of getting something instantly, instant relationship through iPhones, right? Or
Yeah.
uh, texting, give us kind of instant reactions, instant dopamine hits, as they say,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you see something flash on the screen that excites you, right? We can go down that rabbit hole of entertainment, uh,
Yeah.
or the things that stimulate you sexually or uh, recreationally, what have you. Um, so my point being that perhaps like never before, we can at least have the illusion of control and power and speed and uh, resolution, if you will. But that's the danger. And the danger is that we're skimming surfaces of life rather than tapping into that great wisdom tradition that has embraced the depth and mystery of living. And I would uh, point to non dogmatic spiritual and philosophical groups throughout history, movements, uh, groups that uh, ask big questions about life and that support people to stay in reflection, and not just intellectually necessarily, but with one's whole body experience, staying present to the possibilities in those journeys, in those inquiries. we're kind of far away from that in much of our world. Again, often in cubicles and silos, and I'm saying mentally as well as physically. And of course, COVID
Yeah.
didn't help the situation in that way because in many cases we're even more wedded to our technology, to our cubicles, our silos. Certainly, we have that problem in terms of ideologies and horrible divisions in our country and our world. People wanting to stay within the straight and narrow, if you will. Um, I don't know how straight it is. It's but it's again this. I guess it's been that millennial long search for the Holy Grail.
Mhm.
Come, coming against the terror and unsettlement of facing life in its uh, fuller scope, which can also be a much richer way of living too. But uh, but we don't know that if the water we swim in is speed, instant results, and appearance and packaging of things.
Right.
So that's a lot of what I'm advocating with this idea of life enhancing anxiety, writing about it, writing from my own experience about panic and anxiety. And there are certainly many ways, many paths to addressing it, uh, to embracing the life enhancing. I think it's got to start right from the beginning. I mean, it ideally
Yeah.
starts the moment we're thrown into existence.
Yeah.
Uh, that's critical. I mean, how is the baby met at the moment of birth? Is it met with all kinds of fears and rules and regulations that cover over the amazement and the possibilities that the baby has come into, which are unsettling, yes,
Hmm. Hmm.
and wondrous?
Yeah.
That's why I
Yeah.
really appreciate Otto Rank's ideas about he calls it the trauma of birth,
Yeah.
but I call it the drama of birth because I feel like there's very much there's wonder as well as terror at the beginning and floundering helplessness. Uh, and the question is, how do the caretakers and the culture bring uh, bring the holding of the baby, the holding environment for the baby right from the beginning? And unfortunately, that doesn't. I don't think we do that very well overall in our world.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a lot of fears that are carried over from generation to generation too, that are imposed on the baby. I just say quickly, that's the point where we come into awareness of difference as well. This is, as Ronk pointed out, the psychology of difference, of otherness. That's the point where we begin to see uh, the other things, other people, ourselves different from other things, people, ideas. So all kinds of anxieties can come up around that. Are they going to threaten me? Are they going to hurt me? Think about the move from relative unity and non-existence, if you will, to sudden abrupt disunity and pandemonium
Yeah.
and existence. We literally are thrown into that. So how do we swim in that? And I think that's really a thread that runs through our whole life and forms the background for whether we're going to spiral down into the terror realm and the realm of not having any foothold in the groundlessness of existence versus finding some ground within the groundlessness, which is what wonderful mentors and therapists and
Yeah.
teachers and parents, friends can bring. Books can
Yeah.
also do
Yeah.
it.
You- I hesitate to even interrupt you, to be honest, because
Yeah,
of
I'm
the
sorry.
eloquence with which you paint the picture, my good friend. You, you've said so many wonderful things. I want to ask it, if you will, in the following sort of
Sure.
few sort of concepts that I'll put on the table. There's a sense of, we condition each other, and society conditions us, if you will, to almost embrace the illusions of control in that sense, where
Yes.
we're no longer curious or creative. And I like to say curious first before we're creative about the unknown and about what is beyond
Yes.
us.
Yes. Curious.
And how do we break through, Kirk? I mean, this is what,
Yeah.
truly the wisdom of breakthrough and the journey that you've been on. Would love your insights there.
Well, obviously, not everybody has access or can afford the kind of in-depth attention that I had at very critical times in my life. So I realized I was very blessed, extremely blessed, with a gift that's measureless. Uh, but there are other ways, I believe, that people can find this. I would say connecting with a mentor or a friend, maybe someone in the neighborhood, even, who seems to really have an empathy for where you're coming from. Maybe they experience something similar.
Mhm.
Alice Miller calls these people helpful witnesses. They're
Yeah.
so vital along that path, difficult path. So being attuned to the possibility that there are some people who can support you with your questions, your questioning, with your curiosity, rather than slamming you for it, or imposing their ideas on you. So how curiosity is handled, how that spark of openness is handled, maybe it's through a teacher, maybe through books. I do think meditation and contemplation can be wonderful ways of learning to be more present to the fuller ranges of our struggle, of what's beyond the struggle as well, the awesomeness of living. Attempting to see life more through the lens of adventure
Hmm.
rather than presumption or assumption. I was thinking this the other day. I'm so grateful. I was just taking a drive on a turnpike in the Midwest. That's where I grew up, in the Midwest. And I thought when I was a kid, there were times where this was become a routine drive, and I didn't particularly notice things that were going on. I was just focused on the goal of getting to the ocean or whatever, wherever we were going. Um, and this is in contrast to other moments that I really was lit up as a child too. But I think we all get into this, these kind of staid places. But I caught myself really enjoying the scenery, and whether it was just tree after tree on this kind of fairly stark freeway, but appreciating the trees, appreciating the senses that were emerging in me, the uh, touch, the sight, the smells, even memories that were being conjured. Um, really being in that place of being open to the possibilities that may unfold as I went along on this journey. Uh, Being open to surprise,
Yeah.
uh, basically being in kind of a state of wonder with poignancy too, because not all of the memories were happy in a again surface sense. They involved people who are long gone, who I miss.
Yeah.
And I was actually visiting a cousin who was very ill too. But but being in that place of openness to what's unfolding, it just it affected my whole body. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a whole
Yeah.
body experience.
Yeah.
We can have that sense of adventure if one works on it a bit. Um, Taking time, on your walks, on your drives,
Yeah.
whatever, to see through a larger lens, you know. Um,
Kirk,
doesn't you know
Kirk, forgive me if I'm interrupting you in your
No,
in
it's
your thought
okay.
process. You 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 I shared with you very openly. I've passed 3 times, and I have been very fortunate to. I honestly feel guilty at times. I live in that state of awe because everything is so magical. I it's it's hard to explain
And
respectfully.
that's why I would love to hear more about your own experience of awe. Yeah, so it's the preciousness, partly the preciousness of the moment.
Yeah,
Mm,
Kurt, I feel
mm,
guilty at times, to be honest with you,
mm,
that
mm,
and I get
mm,
emotional because
mm.
I want other people to experience
Yeah, I
those
know that
kinds of
feeling.
things.
Yeah.
And I've had great mentors,
Mm,
exactly as you mentioned, if you will,
mm,
tremendous books. My parents,
mm,
my mother and my father, and coming across paths of folks such as yourself, and likewise
mm,
nature has
mm,
been tremendous. I, I would love, if you will, to pose another question,
mhm, mm.
especially around, we talk about stress, and we talk
Yeah,
about stress and de-stress,
mm,
and you're sharing about anxiety and life enhancing
mm,
anxiety.
yeah.
As you kind of think about and reflect on, and I know exactly, as you mentioned, you're writing a book forthcoming around life enhancing anxiety.
Yes.
How do you see that relating to stress and de-stress, or the correlations, or anything, any sort of insights that you can share with us from that vantage point, Kirk?
I'm not sure what you mean by "oostress" and "de-stress." Maybe you can
Sh- d-
elaborate.
d- Definitely, the right degree of stress can be beneficial.
Ah,
So, versus too much stress, if you will, to help be beneficial, and then distress, of course, too much stress becomes has a negative effect at that point. Very much in the sense of anxiety is life enhancing. To me, it
that's right.
resonated so deeply when I
Yeah,
read your work.
yeah. Well, I think it has a lot to do with one's attitude
Mm,
toward the situation. I believe there were studies of people who were type A personalities who were very angry and very stressed out, and uh, I mean, they were angry and irritable because they were
yeah,
so stressed out, and often they didn't really like what they were doing. They going through motions at their jobs, or felt, just financial pressure or whatever it was, pressure, and so their type A is very kind of frenetic in getting things done, but suffering greatly and having many more heart attacks, symptoms, etc. And then people who work in the field of psychological hardiness,
hmm
Salvador Madi is the originator of that, took a look at type A personalities who had a sense of hardiness toward living. They defined hardiness as control, commitment, and not sure what the other connection. I don't remember quite what the other word, but point being is that they felt engaged with what they were doing. And I think you see this in a lot of people, perhaps yourself as well. I know in my own life, I get pretty wound up, and I get
yeah,
pretty, some people might see it as a little frantic. And I can go on for hours and hours with my work,
yeah,
or with sometimes with a physical activity too. But I'm loving it. I'm
yeah,
loving it. That's a big difference with just resenting the hours and the motions that one goes through. So that eustress that you talk about, I think can be achieved depending on one's attitude toward the
Mhm.
situation. And again, here we can draw on some great mentors like Viktor Frankl, who is
Yeah.
able to draw on the freedom of taking attitudes toward the most difficult circumstances one could imagine in Nazi concentration
Yeah.
camps, right?
Yeah.
So he used his imagination, he used his attitude toward the situation to find some little morsel of vitality. I think what he brought up was this, his wife's smile coming into his
Yeah.
mind, picturing that and the sunlight radiating her smile, and how much that shifted his whole sense of being, and also gave him more of a sense of control, of course. And I don't want to romanticize the
Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
extremely depraved and deprived situation. But it is amazing what people can come up with when they tap into the creativity of, of presence to the more of who we are and the more of what we are, what we're a part of, the sense of participating in something much greater than ourselves. So I believe that can help a lot with stress.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, that sense of awe helps me to feel lifted because I'm no longer, again, in that narrow and often grinding identification, often very maybe self critical, judgmental identification. I mean, the Eastern folks talk about this too,
Yeah.
of course, right? In certain mystical areas, Buddhism, Taoism.
Yeah.
I think maybe what I'm bringing that is somewhat of a nuance with that is that the so-called dysphoric emotions are not moved past per se. That's all part of it. It's a rich soup of uh, the struggle, the vulnerability that people feel, that we all feel, as being part of the rich soup of
Yeah.
living, as well as the breaking out of that. It's. I think it's the combination of the two that brings an intensity to life that is very energizing and motivating.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? I mean, again, people are challenged to be creative,
Yeah.
to find ways of seeing their situations differently. And maybe that was one of the positives, actually, of this whole COVID thing,
Hmm.
is that some people were forced to to have more of an inner life,
Yep.
a little more internal and maybe more contemplative about what really matters
Yeah.
about their lives, to
Yeah.
zoom out some and break out of the narrowness. Yeah.
Very eloquently said. There's two phrases that I commonly use, and I'd love your perspective on. Then I've got a very personal question in a sense that I'd like to ask you. Um,
Yeah.
the two phrases are, I always encourage folks to really embrace the reality because the fullness of reality, and really use that to ensure their aliveness.
Yes.
Those two phrases, and I would
Yes.
love your thoughts on those perspectives, if you will, Kirk.
Well, what I hear is embrace the reality, meaning if you're hurt, uh, allow yourself to be hurt. Uh, if you're angry, allow yourself to be angry. I'm not suggesting acting out on these
Right.
things.
Right.
Again, there's a big difference between reacting and responding. I'm talking about
Yep.
responding, meaning being more present to
Yeah.
these feelings, um, reflective of one's whole body experience. And what we find when we are more responsive and reflective about the full range of what we're experiencing is that almost all of those experiences are paradoxes.
Yeah.
The hurt or the sadness might have a side where it also sensitizes us more to the preciousness of life, let's say,
Yeah.
or to being kinder uh, because one realizes how horrible it is to live in an unkind atmosphere, um, or the anger might awaken somebody to their own power,
Hmm.
and it's time for a change. It's also a way of standing up for oneself.
Yeah.
But it can also be a defense, right? And just cause destruction, as all the emotions can cause, if they're just driven by fear, or just uh, one is totally consumed by the emotion, and uh, not able to open up to the more that is emerging at that moment. The possibilities that are emerging for a fuller life. So that's how I hear what you're saying. Is that reverberating when you talk about encountering the reality?
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so.
Encountering
Very much so, Kirk.
the more of reality,
Yeah.
as well
Yeah.
as the immediate hold that reality has on you.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
both there, and
Yeah.
we horribly shortchange ourselves when we just
Yeah.
cut it off and say we're this, we're that,
Yeah.
and that's it. End of
Yeah.
sentence. I
Yeah.
had a mentor therapist, James Bugenthal, who used to say that the word "and" is the most important word in psychotherapy.
Mm.
And he would sometimes say with clients of his, "And you're feeling this, and."
Yeah. Beautiful.
And it can sound a little glib, but it does. It can lead you to the more
Yeah. Yeah.
of what is
It
there.
and it truly does begin to cultivate and ensure that sense of aliveness and that sense of awe. And it is a full experience. It's an emotional, a physical, a psychological, a logical. It's so overwhelming at times, quite honestly. I,
Yeah, can
but
be.
but my friend, I have one other question which I
Yeah.
have to ask if you don't mind. Uh, you, the body of work and the wisdom and the contribution that you have made to humanity is just overwhelming, to be very blunt about it.
Wow.
Thank you, thank you, thank you is not enough. I ask you then, what can we do to return your contribution? What can we all do to return your contribution? What would you ask of us?
Bring more awe into the world. Um, Take more time to reflect on what deeply matters to you, and I think you'll be naturally led to a sense of awe in that way. I just feel that is so critical to our world right now. Even on the level of, I've been facilitating these dialogues between people who are on very contrasting sides of cultural, political issues, uh, braver angels and experiential democracy dialogue. And I see this as coming straight out of that challenge to experience the awesomeness of our moment to moment lives, the humility and the wonder of those lives, sometimes being in uncomfortable situations, conversations. But if one can participate in that, if one can come from a place of genuine curiosity, even though it brings some of that anxiety, this is the life enhancing anxiety I'm talking about, and realize the awesomeness of the diversity that we are, one is in a much greater position to learn about and understand each other, learn about and understand the world more, discover more, and be in a discovery mode more rather than a dogmatic, absolutist place. And I realize these are longer term aspirations. Sometimes we have to do what we have to do just to survive, right? So it's not for all times and places. But in the long run, I feel like if we're going to not only thrive, but just survive as a
Yep.
species, we are going to need to come to terms with differences in ourselves and with others. And um, that's, I think, that in the long run is going to save us from all kinds of physical and emotional destruction.
Very well said.
So,
Very well said.
okay.
Definitely want to respect your time, my good friend. I hope, if you will, once the next book comes out around life enhancing anxiety, you'll hopefully accept an invitation to return and share more of your wisdom with us all around, Kirk, if you will. I,
I'd
I,
be
I
glad to.
truly hope
So,
so. Thank you, my friend.
yeah, I
Thank you.
really appreciated our connection here. And so,
Likewise, likewise. Any sort of closing thoughts before we sign off, Kirk? Any closing thoughts for our audience to really embrace and likewise, I hold on to every word you've shared with us by all means.
well, I realize I kind of skipped over the anxious cycles that we're in, and it feels important to convey the message of how quickly we can devolve into what I call the vicious cycle of polarization. And just to try to catch oneself when one is coming at another person with presumptions, with imposing their view in a very uh, aggressive way, um, not recognizing how much that amps up that vicious cycle and creates more of a backlash, which then amps up your own reactivity. And uh, those are the kind of spirals that I hope we can step back from and catch ourselves more in regard to. So,
Very well said.
yeah, reflect, get that meta perspective going.
Yeah,
Very important to see what you're seeing. Be aware of what you're aware of more.
beautiful. Words of wisdom all around. My- A pleasure and an honor to have you and time. Thank you ever so much, Kirk. You've shared a tremendous amount with us. And for all those that have been listening or will listen to the recording, truly a living legend amongst us, if you will, that we have so much wisdom to take from. A pleasure, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you ever so much, Kirk.
It's
Thank you.
doing my best. Okay.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you.